So Frank asked me to do a presentation on my work around the George Floyd protests here in LA, in Santa Monica. Obviously, with COVID, COVID has been interesting. It's forced me to, in an enjoyable way, really embrace reportage, documentary work, which is really what I love. It's what I got into photography for in the first place. So I've been shooting reportage on COVID life, strange days as I call it, and being asthmatic officially, I was also a little wary of what I shot throughout the time. As the George Floyd story just got bigger and bigger and protests were happening in LA, part of me was, okay, I really wanted to shoot it because being an editorial photographer, you always gravitate, you always want to shoot the people and events of your time. That's essentially why we do editorial photography. So I knew it was something I would want to shoot, but at the same time, I was cautious about it. I saw it was the Saturday, it must have been May 30th, when in the Fairfax district of LA, it really, suddenly, I didn't personally think it would get that out of hand, but it got really out of hand. And it wasn't actually till the next day, the Sunday morning, that my girlfriend actually told me, that there was going to be a protest in Santa Monica. So I really didn't know about it till that day. So I started doing some research and, found that the march was planned to be happening pretty close to where I was. So I didn't really have any batteries charged, but I just kind of went out and shot some to get going.
And any apprehension, I'm going to shoot protest work? I mean, you haven't done that type of work. I mean, like, how do you get there for your head?
No, I started out my career doing that. To be honest, it's second nature. When I was in London, I was working for The Independent and The Guardian, the national newspapers, and I shot all kinds of stuff. There was riots. I shoot a lot of soccer, and I shot a lot of hooligan riots and stuff, and lootings and the poll tax riots. I've actually shot quite a bit of this stuff, and Hurricane Katrina. Not that there was any of that, but I've shot social unrest stuff before, and essentially news stuff is kind of my background. So it's in my blood, and so following the storytelling in a fluid environment, it's kind of what I do in photography. Let me just see. Why is it? Okay. So I literally was on my bike and just trying to follow the story, see what was happening. The marchers it was quite a large march, and they were going up and down Ocean Avenue from Montana to the Santa Monica Pier, for anyone who's familiar. And it was heavily policed. At the point where this shot was taken was right outside the Santa Monica Pier. There was an awful lot of police right here, literally blocking the entrance to the pier, and also on Ocean Avenue. I found out later that it turns out that the police apprehended people trying to Molotov cocktail the Santa Monica Pier. I don't know how true that is, but I heard that in a police report, in a newspaper report on a police report. So, it was heavily policed. What I noticed the previous day in the Fairfax district is that there was a march on Fairfax Avenue, and let me just try to move this so I can see over here. There was a march on Fairfax Avenue, and that was heavily policed. And obviously there was cop cars on fire, and it's clearly out of hand. But what I also saw from helicopter footage is literally a few blocks away, there was mass looting going on inside the shopping center of the Grove. And there was like zero police there. I mean, I could literally see it on the hell. It was incredible to see. It was shocking. Obviously, the police can't be everywhere. The question is, were they over-policing the march? I mean, who's to say? That's kind of what was starting to, that's what I noticed here. It was heavily policed at the march. So being on my bike, I took the opportunity to go to the shopping area, which was literally a block and a half away. And this is what I found, just people, they blocked off the main shopping areas, but looters were just going in and coming out with handfuls of clothes and whatever. I mean, who knows if they fit them? I mean, it just seemed to be a free for all. But it was shocking to see. It was amazing to see. What was interesting, photographing it, no one was paying attention to me. Obviously, they were looking for cops. That was their main objective. And I was almost invisible. I was right in front of them. I'm on a wide-angle lens right there, and it was really quite interesting to shoot. So I started to pay attention to this. The march, to my what I'd seen at that point, was loud, was vociferous, and it was very forceful. But it was peaceful, and my judgment, I thought it would stay peaceful. I actually don't know. I heard there were smoke grenades that went off later, but I didn't see that. So I followed this story, and I went around the corner to, this is outside the Vons store, which this guy's got a box of sneakers, which seemed to be heavily ransacked. And there were so many people just coming all of a sudden. It was incredible how many people were just suddenly appearing, and there was no cops anywhere. And it was just growing at its own pace. And I just kept shooting pictures, and it was just incredible to see. This is right next door to the Vons store. This is a chap who, there were 3 cops on motorbikes, and he was trying to get their attention because there's a jewelry store next to the Vons store. And he was saying, there's a guy inside the jewelry store who's got a shotgun shooting out. So I was just picking up bits of information as I went, and I was like, okay, this is getting really crazy. I didn't hear any of that. The cops went to investigate. They didn't break in. Then they had to go on another emergency. So I just followed the crowd. And what was incredible is that there were cars. You can see a guy getting out of a car on the right of the frame here. People, the concept of cars on the right and cars on the left going one way or the other was completely out the window. This was just a stream of cars going up 4th Street, which is a street which leads directly off the freeway, the 10 freeway to Santa Monica. And my guess is that people from other parts of town were coming off the freeway. Word was out you could loot, or it's lawless. And there was just streams of cars coming up 4th Street heading north. Driver in, people jumping out, getting stuff back in a car. I mean, it was just a crazy hectic. So I think this was a tobacco store of all things. Right next to this store was this chap who just stood stoically throughout a few minutes. I observed him just very calmly, 2 fingers on his, and no one bothered his store. He didn't look me in the eye. I tried to get a shot like that. He was looking through everything. He was focused. He wasn't looking anyone in the eye. He was just making a stance for his store. And his store survived.
So Robert, this trend, I mean, it goes from this nice peaceful protest that you went to, and all of a sudden it gets a little bit hairy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be a little bit scared, and you think like this may get out of control.
Yeah, well, just let me point out, this was in a separate part of town now from the protest. Right. The protest was a good 4 blocks away, and again, heavily policed. And now
is pretty close still, right?
Yeah, it's still pretty close. I mean, it's pretty damn close. And there were some cops kicking about, but in groups of 2 or 3, and you'll see later. But yeah, it was getting, there was potential for it to be hairy, but, and I'll show you that too later. But I didn't feel, I felt good, I felt, obviously I felt I'm just documenting what's going on. And I didn't feel threatened. I mean, I was getting about by my bike, and I had a bike helmet on, so I felt I had a certain amount of protection. But I certainly didn't feel threatened. I felt I was there as a documentarian, and I almost felt somewhat I don't know. I didn't feel he saw me as a threat.
So here's a really good question. How has your photography of the protest and looting affected your view on social justice issues? From Kat. Great question.
I mean, I'm a big proponent of social justice, you know, of course. Is looting the right way to go about it? I mean, that's a whole other question. It's not for me to say. I personally, I obviously don't feel it's the right thing to do, but at the same time, with one of Olga's photos where, you know, it said, we built this country for free, we have the right to loot, you know, it's an argument, it's a discussion. I don't have the answer. But this is what happened, this is what I saw, this is what was humanity at that moment in this part of Santa Monica. And, you know, frankly, it was lawless. And it was a strange sensation to be in the middle of absolute mayhem, and come out of it unscathed. So this is this cops flying down the road, trying to chase looters, trying to break into the back of stores. They were always chasing, they were always 2 steps behind anything going on. And, you know, I didn't know what they could do. And then further up the street, this is outside a jewelry store. I was photographing a shopkeeper here on the left they were literally quite late trying to board up their store. And they did successfully board up their store, but it was incredible to see these shopkeepers boarding up the store. Meanwhile, jewelry store being looted to the right, a Chase Bank being broken into on the left, and they were right in the middle of it. And they successfully boarded up and didn't get broken into. And I can't imagine what was going through their minds. So this is just outside the jewelry store, just down the road there, just after that explosion went off. I don't know what it was, but it was a huge explosion. And there's a big gathering. And I didn't know exactly what was going on, but it was quite dynamic to shoot. So I was shooting this. And then as the crowd split a little, I saw all these guys carting this thing, which turns out to be the safe, I think, from the jewelry store. So this really exemplified the brazenness. And I followed these guys for actually a good couple of blocks. And I was even right in front of them, shooting them to make better pictures. And I still didn't feel, you know, no one really batted an eyelid, which was kind of interesting. So I was, you know, I would just try to make the best pictures of a very strange, unusual event.
So wait a second. You've got all these young men robbing this safe, right? Going through these stores, and unfortunately, they're predominantly African Americans. Right. Is there a piece of you that says, I mean, it's wrong, of course, but, you know, like documenting these these young folks doing bad things sort of takes away from, you know, the best part of what you had a few blocks away. I mean, that's an interesting place to find yourself in a short period of time.
Well, I can't say, I don't feel these were the same people.
No, agreed.
That were protesting.
Absolutely.
Right? So is your question, does it take away from the validity of the protest?
I don't really know, Robert. I'm just looking at it from a standpoint because there was so much good going on and so much, you know, really noble protesting that, you know, the same people who have all these pure, truly racism issues in the way they, you know, have to live now are, you know, taking away from the goodness of the day to this part, but you understand the frustration level for those folks.
Right.
Yeah, and again, there's no real answer. It's just
Right.
really maybe more of an observation.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you just said there. Basically, I don't quite know how to process it because, yeah, clearly you can't just break the law brazenly, But and for me, having the strange opportunity to witness and photograph so many people time after time, doing these breaking the law, basically, it's like, okay, well, I better just photograph this because this is not normal behavior. That's kind of the standpoint I come from.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was just, like I said, an overarching observation.
No, it's a great question, and I think that is the question. Is pictures of looting, do they have a place in this conversation? Do they take away from the Black Lives Matter movement? Yeah, they do take away, but do they have a place? Well, people are doing it.
Yeah.
It's happening. So in terms of documentary evidence of how news evolves, yeah, I think they have a place.
Yeah. I interrupted.
No, okay, yeah. So, and this is so speaking, on that. So I saw this sign, "Save a Life, Kill a Cop," which is like, wow, okay, it's really getting pretty clear. There's they're trying to get some violence, or I don't know, is violence on the horizon? It was quite shocking to see, and this is outside a CVS store, on the side of a CVS store, which literally I just turned the corner, had got broken into, and there was looters just coming from cars. Everyone was pulling up, just hauling in, and I wanted the light was actually strangely beautiful, and I wanted to make a picture of the sign and have some foreground action. And these guys got out of a car that just pulled up, and it seemed to me they were heading straight into the CVS, which they were, and this guy gave me a chilling look, which that was the point where I thought, okay, now maybe I could be targeted. So I started to think, okay, maybe I should back off a little, or be careful. And then further down the street from that, there was a building on fire. This is back to the Jack's Jewelers there. This is on the corner of Santa Monica and 4th Street. And it looked like there was one cop car to protect the firefighters, to try to put out the fire. And there was literally a mob behind me, pelting the cops. And obviously someone had just broken a window in the cop car and had written on the cop car. And this cop's he's got his hand on his handgun. And I'm like, okay, this is about to get super, super testy. So, that's kind of where I headed at. And I heard some other people in the mob, like, they're surrounding us. So I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to get out of here. So part of being a photojournalist is like knowing when it's time to get going.
And both of these guys on the left and right are professional photographers as well.
I didn't check IDs. I have no idea.
They just look like, with the cameras the way they're
They
holding.
look, I mean, it's hard to say these days, vloggers and whatnot, but yeah, they look like, potentially. But anyway, that was the craziness of that day. A lot to process. The next day, the city of Santa Monica put out a message, and the whole of downtown was like swarmed with people making a community effort to clean up the town. And that was a beautiful thing to see, actually. Just teams of people mucking in, and honestly, in like no time, a lot of the graffiti and whatnot had been cleaned up, and that was beautiful. So what happened over the following few days is there was a lot of this community artwork that, because we for that following week, we went through like 2 p.m. curfew for literally the whole of the week, it seemed. The city felt very under threat. We had the National Guard was on site, and so everything was pretty locked down. but the stores were still boarded up. This is the Patagonia store, and there was a lot of community artwork which sprung up organically, which was really, really quite interesting and beautiful. And you know, it just showed another side to how people, you know, how obviously how people can react as a community, and these were great. One of the ladies painting, the one on the bottom right, you know, they were like, we're hoping the city keeps them, and you know, does an art show, which I thought was a great idea.
Yeah. So Robert, from a standpoint of you, just as a member of the community, going through these types of emotions from one day to the next,
Mm-hmm.
can you share a little bit of like how that made you feel? I mean, there had to be points where you were horribly depressed, and then you come and you see this, and this is really beautiful. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
you step away from being just a photographer, you
Right.
know, being a resident.
Yeah, that's a great question, because this is my city, and it's a beautiful small town, really, and it's really kind of like a small town in LA. People are great. Maybe it's in a bit of a bubble, I don't know, but you know, it did feel like a bit of an invasion. I'll be perfectly honest. This, you know, uh, but I guess that's why this was important, because this was the people of Santa Monica, without judgment, really, just cleaning up,
Yeah.
trying to cover the bad, cover the craziness up with love and unity. It did make me actually, this whole week, I think everything I shot here happened over a week, really, or less than a week.
Wow.
But in that week, it made me love Santa Monica a little bit more. You know, I moan about Santa Monica. I'm from England. Yeah, you know, sometimes it's too hot in
It's
Santa
what you
Monica.
do.
Yeah, it's what we do. Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I'll moan. I'll have a good moan. But
Did the police ask you for any of the photographs to help facilitate their arrest? A question from Nancy Langer.
not me personally. No. The pictures are with my agency that I stuck these with, Redux Pictures. So, you know, they're
So?
available. Yeah. So no, I didn't get a request directly. So yeah, so let's see what's on here. So moving on, there were some other protests in Santa Monica following this. I think this one particularly was trying to get the resignation of the police chief, because I think part of the problem was the protest on that day was so heavily policed. There was no police to police the shopping district, if you like. So there was all kind of questions of like, you know, what were the priorities and all this stuff. And so there was that side to the protesters, as well as obviously Black Lives Matter, clearly the underlying protest. And there was a lot of Santa Monica high school students protesting as well. So I like to shoot portraits of people, very, very strong, very clear, very direct, very kind of graphic in your way, very in your face a little bit. So I noticed that the really interesting bit about the protest for me is how vociferous people were in the face. And so I was actually on a 200mm lens, and I just picked up a few people who I could see, obviously they were unmasked at that moment, because I tried to photograph people screaming with a mask on. It just doesn't work for a picture, frankly. So I kind of street cast as I went, you know, okay, this guy's good, and grabbed a few frames, and it made a really nice set of pictures of the emotion of story, really, individual emotion tied together. And I thought that was an interesting way to cover a march. And this was, so this march, the National Guard was in town at this point. They actually marched all over town. It was a really hot day. And they at one point, they ended up at the Santa Monica Pier again. And that's pretty much where the police drew a line with the National Guard to stop. They didn't want people going to the pier because it's a national landmark. And at that line, the protesters, there was, you start to get images of police chiefs kneeling, you know, and the mayor kneeling and stuff. And I think that's a great symbol. I'm glad it's finally got some credibility, you know, after many years of Colin Kaepernick standing for it. And that obviously that was the symbol. And the protesters were pleading with the police on duty, kneel with us. And you can see one of the National Guard did here, and she was pleading with this officer. And the police chief next to us, or I don't think he was a police chief, but the police, highest level police on this location, they did kneel. And the students were so emotional. This was a really beautiful moment. They were just so overcome with emotion. And I think, you know, they just felt, you know, we're connecting, we're making a breakthrough. And I have to say, when I was taking this sequence, you know, I was emotional myself. I had a tear in my eye because it felt like a victory for them. And you know, it was, and then the again, not the police chief, but one of the officers marched with the kids, the students, and you know, that was, I thought, you know, it was just a symbol of hope and hopefully reconciliation, or, you know, hopefully a way forward. And, you know, that was a beautiful thing to see after everything we've seen. And then, you know, I'll end with this shot, you know, which really was at that same march, which hopefully symbolizes the unity and that we can forge out of this, hopefully.
Wow.
The end.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, it's yeah, very yeah, it's humbling, the wonderful shots that you created there, you know, documenting such an important issue. So where do you go from there, Robert?
You mean in terms of,
I mean, will you keep on covering it? Is it, you know, or,
you know, I'll see. Again, like I was saying, you know, I'm being COVID careful. I only covered things in Santa Monica because I don't want to put myself too much at risk. I'm trying to stay local, and I'm really shooting in a very limited capacity, to be perfectly honest. So I'll, you know, for me, this is the story of Santa Monica. I'll see what happens within the story of Santa Monica. I feel it's been through the whole gamut of things that could go on within the Black Lives Matter protests. Obviously, we're seeing crazy things in Portland. So, you know, it's hard to say where things can go anywhere, but I'll keep my eyes and ears open locally.
does that, you know, things going on in different states, different cities, do you feel the burning desire to jump on a plane or you know, drive in your car to those other cities?
Yeah, I mean, when things were going on in downtown LA a few days before this, it was on my radar. You know, I was thinking about it. The reason I started, and I was hesitant the morning of Sunday the 31st, but you know, I was on my bike, and I just, let me just scope it out and let me see how distant I can shoot it. Let me see how safe I feel. Obviously, I actually wore double mask the whole time. You know, so when I was shooting, I have a camera to my eye, so I kind of felt somewhat protected, even right in front of people, COVID wise. So I am shooting everything through a filter of COVID safety first and foremost. You know, because
I tend to forget that when you look at them.
Yeah.
You have an invitation to go to Minneapolis to document the cleanup and the rebuilding from Kat. So I'm sure she's going to be reaching out to you.
What was the come to Minneapolis? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I just don't want to jump on a plane. I mean, it's going to be a while, I think, before I jump on a plane.
So work like this, does it change you, Robert?
I mean, I love to. I became a photographer to be a witness to life front and center. That's what I've always been driven to do. That's what I always will do.
Right.
Does it change me? I mean, I'm hopeful. I think the Black Lives Matter movement is wonderful. I hope real change comes out of it. I'm hopeful. People have short memories these days. That's my only concern,
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest.
And is it different when you're photographing this type of work that's right in your backyard?
Technically, in terms of how you do it, how you cover it, no. Emotionally, yeah, it feels a little more personal. Sure.
Yeah.
But
that had, or has that happened frequently in your career?
it's happened on occasion. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
happened on occasion. But I don't think as a independent observer photographer, you can't let that impact what you're doing. It's like that. You can't get emotionally driven by it.
Right.
I think you have to be objective about it. And that includes whether it's in your backyard, whether it's something of your personal property, whatever it might be.
Right. Right. So, I mean, really, really beautiful work. I have to tell you, the only thing I'm a little bit sad about, you referenced it about, I don't know, 8 or 9 times. We don't get to see the bike.
Oh, my bike.
Yes, you mentioned the bike a bunch of times, and it seems like that was your lifeline there to get in.
That's a great point. The bike has been my lifeline throughout the whole of COVID, actually. The other project I shot pretty much entirely on bike, and I've been biking so much through the whole. So yeah, the bike was a big player. And Kevin Steele, I think, is on here. He might have a shot.
I saw Kevin. I saw Kevin jump in.
Yeah, we bumped into each other somewhat on that day, so Kevin might have some behind-the-scenes shots of me and the bike.
Okay, we have to get that then.
Yeah, yeah.
So let me just see any more messages there. No, just everyone's jumping in. Great work. And in fact, Kevin does say, "I've got a photograph of Robert on this day on his bike."
Okay, great. Then maybe you can even upload it. I don't know.
Yeah, that'll be a collector's item for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's fantastic.
Yes. So, it's really a terrific night. If anyone wants to open up and have any other things to chat about,